Breaking tonight from Munich, America just told Europe we belong together, and in the next breath warned its allies to prepare to defend themselves. From the stage of the world's premier security conference, Secretary of State Marco Rubio promised unity, but signaled a new world order where Washington expects Europe to carry far more of the military load.
New world order.
Europe's burden.
At the same summit, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky begged Donald Trump and the U.S. Congress for real security guarantees against Vladimir Putin. So what is the real message from the U.S. in Munich 2026? That America will stand shoulder to shoulder with Europe, or that Europe should get ready to stand alone?
The Trump administration is committed to leading on the world stage, strengthening our alliances and confronting shared threats together.
In his speech, Rubio reassured Europe that the United States and Europe belong together, emphasizing a shared history and shared values.
Our alliances are the bedrock of our shared security and prosperity. His tone marked a sharp contrast with last year's remarks, which were far more skeptical.
Rubio also made clear this administration wants a different kind of partnership, one where allies can defend themselves more robustly. We want allies who can defend themselves, he said, so no adversaries will feel inclined to challenge our collective strength. In other words, the transatlantic bond should stay, but Europe must shoulder more of the military burden in this new world order. While Rubio spoke of unity, the war in Ukraine remained the unspoken backdrop to every sentence. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the same summit, warning that Russia's Vladimir Putin cannot live without war. Zelensky urged Donald Trump and the U.S. Congress to provide real security guarantees before the war in Ukraine ends. His message was simple: promises and rhetoric are not enough. Ukraine wants concrete commitments it can rely on when the shooting stops. At Munich, more than 50 members of the U.S. Congress and other dignitaries also attended an unusually large American political delegation. Prominent Democrats used the gathering to outline their own foreign policy visions, sometimes at odds with Trump's approach. For European leaders, it felt like watching two Americas at once: the official Trump administration voice and a competing chorus from Congress. Rubio's core message: the alliance survives, but on new terms that demand more self-reliance from U.S. partners. Zelensky's core message: the war is not over, and Ukraine's future and Europe's security still depends heavily on U.S. decisions. Between these two messages, Munich became a stage for a bigger question. What does American leadership look like in the Trump era? Reassuring, conditional, or both? For NATO and the EU, the stakes are high. A misread of Washington's intentions could mean under-preparing or over-relying on promises that may not hold. The words "belong together" sounded comforting. The words "defend themselves" sounded like a warning. To understand why this matters so much, we need to step back and look at the history, the war, and the politics colliding in that Munich hall. The Munich Security Conference has long been a kind of annual health check for the West. It's where American and European leaders come to reassure each other or to sound alarms. In recent years, there's been a lot more alarm than reassurance. During Donald Trump's first term, European allies watched in shock as he questioned NATO, praised strongmen, and demanded allies pay more or risk losing U.S. protection. That memory still hangs over every American speech in Munich. Now in his new term, that pressure is back, but with more structure. Rubio's message is softer than some of Trump's past outbursts, but the core demand is the same. Europe must become militarily stronger, faster. For years, Washington has complained that too many NATO members underinvest in defense, counting on American troops and American money as a kind of security subsidy. Under Trump, that complaint became a public ultimatum. Rubio's line, "We belong together," is designed to calm nerves. His follow-up, that allies must be able to defend themselves, is designed to shift responsibility. It's a carrot and a stick delivered in one speech. From Europe's perspective, the timing could hardly be more sensitive. Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine has already shattered decades of assumptions about peace on the continent. Defense budgets are rising, but so are fears. Countries like Germany, long criticized for underspending on defense, are now scrambling to rearm, ordering tanks, missiles and ammunition at a pace they haven't seen in generations. But rebuilding real capability takes time. Into this landscape steps Marco Rubio, speaking for a U.S. administration that wants allies to be stronger while still holding some cards close about how far America itself will go if the worst happens. The contrast with Vice President J.D. Vance's more confrontational tone the year before is not an accident. Rubio is playing good cop to reassure. even as the administration's overall approach signals a harder line on burden sharing. At the same time, Zelensky's speech cut through the diplomatic language with something more raw. For him, this isn't about long-term budget debates. It's about whether his country survives the next year or the next offensive. When he says Putin cannot live without war, he's not speaking metaphorically. He's describing a neighbor that has already invaded, already bombed cities, already tried to erase Ukraine as an independent state. Zelensky's plea to Trump and Congress for real security guarantees is about the day after the war as much as the war itself. He doesn't want Ukraine to become a frozen conflict or a sacrificial buffer zone between Russia and the West. He's asking, when the guns fall silent, will the U.S. and Europe actually lock in protections for Ukraine, or will they settle for vague promises that depend on the next election cycle? In Munich, the presence of more than 50 members of Congress is a sign that America's foreign policy debate is not confined to the Trump administration alone. Democrats and some Republicans are offering alternate visions, some more hawkish, some more cautious. For European leaders, that can be both comforting and confusing. Comforting, because there are still strong pro-NATO voices on Capitol Hill. Confusing, because U.S. messages can sound very different depending on which American you're listening to. The phrase New World Order has been floating around Munich for years, but under Trump it has a new edge. It no longer just means adapting to China or climate change, it means recalibrating what U.S. guarantees really mean. Rubio's framing "belong together, but defend yourselves" is one version of that recalibration. It suggests a West that stays united, but expects Europe to become more militarily independent, even as it stays politically aligned with Washington. Some in Europe welcome that push. They say the continent should have taken its own defense more seriously long ago, instead of assuming U.S. troops would always be stationed on their soil, ready to respond. Others worry that talk of self-reliance is really code for a future where America might hesitate or even refuse to act if Russia or another adversary crosses a red line. They hear not just partnership, but possible abandonment. For countries on NATO's eastern flank, Poland, the Baltics, Romania, that fear is not theoretical. They look at Ukraine and see what can happen when a neighbor decides your land is negotiable. Zelensky's intervention in Munich is a reminder that for frontline states, security guarantees are not just documents. They are the difference between rebuilding a future and constantly preparing for the next invasion. He is effectively telling Trump and Congress, "Don't make promises you want to keep. And don't leave us half-protected in a gray zone that tempts Putin to try again." Inside the Munich halls, everyone knows that whatever is said on stage is only half the story. The other half is what gets discussed over coffee, in back rooms, and in private calls between capitals once the conference ends. European officials are quietly trying to read Trump's second-term intentions through Rubio's words. Is this administration ultimately committed to NATO or merely committed to being unpredictable? The presence of so many U.S. lawmakers in Munich adds another layer. Democrats, especially, are signaling to Europe, "We're still here. We still believe in alliances. Don't write America off as one man's foreign policy." But Europe has learned the hard way that U.S. politics swing fast. Today's reassurances can be tomorrow's reversals. That's one reason why calls for a more autonomous European defense posture are getting louder. From Paris to Berlin, leaders are talking about strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe should be able to act militarily with or without Washington's blessing or participation. Rubio's defend themselves line, then, lands on fertile ground. To some, it's encouragement. To others, it sounds like a warning shot. Get ready, because U.S. protection might not be as automatic as it once was. For Zelensky, that same language is more complicated. Ukraine is not a NATO member. It relies on support, weapons, and political backing from the very allies now being told to stand more on their own feet. If Europe is pushed to do more for its own defense, will there be the political will and the money to keep doing as much for Ukraine? Or will some capitals argue that resources must shift inward, away from Kyiv's needs? These are the kinds of fears that give urgency to Zelensky's call for real security guarantees before the war ends. He doesn't want Ukraine's security to become a variable in internal Western burden-sharing debates. Behind the scenes, European diplomats are also thinking long-term. If Trump's current team stays, what will U.S. policy look like in 4 years? If a different president arrives, will they reverse course yet again? Planning for that kind of volatility is nearly impossible. For decades, the bet in Europe was that America's core commitments to NATO, to democracy, to the idea of the West were stable, no matter who occupied the White House. that bet looks less safe than it used to. Rubio's "belong together" phrase tries to reassure that some things haven't changed. But his emphasis on self-defense and a rebalanced alliance underlines that, at the very least, the terms of the relationship are being rewritten. What emerges from Munich this year is not a break, but a negotiation. A negotiation over who pays, who risks, who leads, and whose fears carry the most weight when Russian artillery is still firing and China's power is still growing. For ordinary Europeans, these debates can seem abstract until war or crisis hits. Then the question of whether the US will truly stand by its words stops being academic and becomes brutally real. For ordinary Americans, Munich can feel far away. But the decisions made there shape where US troops deploy, where US tax dollars go, and how likely it is that America gets dragged into or stays out of the next big conflict. The Trump administration's message, through Rubio, is that America still wants to be the anchor of the West, just not the only pillar holding the roof up. Europe is expected to build more of the structure itself. Whether that leads to a stronger, more balanced alliance or to a more fragile one where everyone quietly doubts everyone else will depend on what happens after the speeches, when budgets are written and crises actually hit. In the meantime, Zelensky's voice cuts through the abstractions with a real-time test. If the US and Europe belong together, can Ukraine count on that belonging when it needs it most? Or is it still on the outside, hoping the circle widens in time? Munich 2026 won't settle these questions, but it has put them on the record. Rubio's call for stronger allies, Zelensky's call for stronger guarantees, and Europe's quiet calculation of how much it can trust both. In a world of rising authoritarian powers, fractured politics, and unfinished wars, the phrase "we belong together" can sound either like a promise or like a plea. The difference will be measured in tanks, troops, and treaties, not just in applause lines. For now, Europe leaves Munich with both comfort and concern. Comfort, because America's top diplomat spoke the language of partnership. Concern, because the fine print of that partnership is still being rewritten in ways that could shape this century. The real test of Rubio's words will not be this week's headlines, but the next crisis, the next Russian move, the next escalation, the next moment when someone on this continent looks east and wonders who is coming to help. By then, we'll know whether defend themselves meant stand stronger alongside us, or prepare to stand without us. That is the fear some allies still refuse to say out loud. What happened in that Munich hall today is more than just another conference speech. It's a snapshot of an alliance in transition caught between old assumptions and new realities, between past wars and the ones that might still come. As long as Putin keeps attacking Ukraine, Zelensky will keep asking whether the West's words are enough. As long as Trump is in the White House, Europe will keep asking what his administration's words really mean. Between those questions lies the future of the Transatlantic Alliance, and the answer will shape whether "belong together" is remembered as a promise fulfilled, or as a phrase that couldn't hold when history pushed hard. This is U.S. Media Power, bringing you the story behind the speeches, not just the soundbites. We'll stay on this as the war in Ukraine and the U.S.-Europe relationship both enter their most critical phase yet. If you want deeper coverage of U.S. foreign policy, Europe's security, and the frontline voices fighting to be heard in halls of power, stay with us, subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comments below.